The roast beef sat in the center of the table, steam rising toward the crystal chandelier I had paid to have cleaned 3 days prior. Around it, the full spread of Christmas dinner stretched across white linen, glazed carrots, rosemary potatoes, fresh rolls from the bakery on Fifth, and 2 bottles of wine that cost more than my brother's weekly paycheck. All of it catered, all of it billed to my card. $1,200 for a dinner where I would be the guest nobody wanted to hear from. My father, George Ellerton, sat at the head of the table in his pressed navy blazer, the one my mother had picked out for him at Nordstrom 3 Christmases ago. He cleared his throat the way he always did when he wanted the room to pay attention. His eyes weren't on me. They weren't on Lily. They were locked on the man seated 2 chairs to his right, Richard Henley, 58, silver hair, quiet hands, a partner at one of the most well-known venture capital firms in Texas. My father had met him at a Rotary Club dinner 6 weeks earlier and had spent every day since talking about the invitation like he'd landed a meeting at the White House. "Richard," my father said, leaning forward with the kind of forced confidence that always made my stomach tighten. "I appreciate you coming out tonight. Means a lot to have someone of your caliber at our table. I wanted you to meet my son, Connor. He's the real talent in this family. Got an app idea that's going to change the insurance game." Connor, 26 and seated directly across from Richard, smirked. He was wearing a button-down shirt our mother had ironed for him that morning. I knew because I'd seen it draped over the back of the kitchen chair when I arrived at noon to help set up. He hadn't held a job longer than 4 months in his life. He had dropped out of a business program I had paid $15,000 to enroll him in. He worked part-time at our uncle's insurance firm, a job he got because our uncle owed our father a favor, not because Connor had earned anything, but at this table, Connor was the future. Connor was the investment. Connor was the one worth introducing. I stayed quiet. I cut a small piece of potato and placed it on Lily's plate. She was 8. She sat beside me in a green velvet dress she had picked out herself, her dark hair pulled back with a ribbon I had tied that morning in the car. She was quiet, too. She had learned to be quiet at these dinners. I had spent the last 4 years building Ellerton systems from a desk in my bedroom. It started as a project management tool I coded during Lily's nap times. By year 2, we had 3 enterprise clients. By year 3, we had 41. I didn't talk about it at family dinners. I didn't talk about it at all. My parents called it playing on the computer. My mother once told a neighbor I was between real jobs. My father referred to my work as Blair's little hobby at Thanksgiving last year, loud enough for the entire table to hear. They didn't know I had quietly paid off their $85,000 home equity loan through a series of anonymous wire transfers routed through a holding company James Miller had set up for me. They didn't know I had covered $42,500 in medical bills when my mother needed emergency surgery 2 years ago. Bills that showed up as insurance adjustments on her statements because I had called the hospital billing department myself and arranged it. They didn't know the $15,000 Connor used for his 1 semester of business school came from a trust I funded. They didn't know because I never told them. I told myself it was generosity. I told myself it was what family did. I told myself that if I just kept giving quietly, eventually the warmth would come back. It never did. $142,500 over 5 years. That was the price of trying to belong to a family that had already decided I didn't. "And what do you do, Blair?" Richard asked. His voice was neutral, polite, the kind of question a well-mannered guest asks the person at the table no one has introduced. Before I could open my mouth, my father let out a sharp, mocking laugh, the kind that cuts through a room and leaves a mark. He set down his wine glass and looked at Richard with the easy confidence of a man who had never once questioned whether he was wrong about anything. "Blair?" He shook his head, smiling. "She's a consultant, which is code for unemployed with a laptop." He looked down at Lily. "Don't grow up to be like your mother, honey. She's a parasite who doesn't understand hard work." He turned to me, his voice rising just enough to make sure every person at the table heard him clearly. "It's a shame your daughter has to see what a failure you are, Blair. You really should have followed Connor into the insurance business. At least then you'd have something to show for yourself." The table went still. My mother, Barbara, let out a small, nervous giggle. She always giggled when my father said something cruel. It was her way of smoothing the edges, of telling the room that this was normal, that this was just how George was, that no one needed to be uncomfortable. She reached for her wine glass and took a long sip, her eyes darting to Richard to gauge whether the performance had landed. My father sat back in his chair, satisfied. Lily froze. Her fork hovered halfway to her mouth, a small piece of glazed carrot balanced on the tines. Her hand trembled. Not a lot, just enough. She looked at me with wide, searching eyes, and I watched something cross her face that I had spent every day of her life trying to prevent. Shame. Hot, sudden, borrowed shame for her mother, the kind that seeps into a child's bones and stays there for decades if no one stops it. She set her fork down slowly. Her lower lip trembled once. She didn't cry. She just looked down at her plate and went very, very still. Something inside me snapped. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a clean, quiet break. Like a thread pulled taut for years finally letting go. The sound it made was silence. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply set my fork down and looked across the table at Richard Henley. Richard was already staring at me. His brow was furrowed, not with confusion, with recognition. He tilted his head slightly, the way a person does when a name they've been carrying around suddenly connects to a face. Ellerton Systems, he said. Not a question. A statement. He set his napkin beside his plate. Blair. Are you the B. Ellerton who just closed a $5 million Series A with Miller and Associates? The silence that followed was absolute. Not the comfortable kind, not the kind that settles after grace, the kind that falls like a blade. My mother's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. Connor's smirk dissolved. My father's face went blank, then confused, then something worse. Something that looked like the first crack in a wall he'd spent 30 years building. I am, I said. My voice was steady, sharp, clear. Richard turned to my father. His expression shifted from polite guest to something colder, something professional. George, I think you've misunderstood the room. Blair is the most sought-after founder in the Austin Tech corridor. I've been trying to get a meeting with her for 6 months. I only came tonight because I saw the last name on the invitation and hoped she might be here. He paused. Let that land. She's not a consultant, George. She's the CEO of one of the fastest-growing SaaS platforms in the state. The $28 million valuation was announced this morning. I signed the term sheet myself. My mother set her glass down. The giggle was gone. In its place was a stillness I had never seen on her face before. She looked at my father, then at me, then back at my father. Connor opened his mouth. Richard, if you've got a second, I'd love to walk you through my concept for an insurance app that... I don't, Richard said. He didn't look at Connor. He stood up, buttoned his jacket, and turned to me. Blair, I apologize for the circumstances. If you ever want to discuss a secondary round, my office is open. He placed a business card on the table beside my plate. Then he looked around the dining room, at the catered food, at the clean chandelier, at the white linen and the candles, and the $1,200 worth of effort that no one at this table had contributed to. If this is how you treat the most successful person in your bloodline, he said quietly, I don't think I have any interest in hearing about Connor's app. He left through the front door. The sound of it closing was soft, final. The room stayed frozen. My father's hands were flat on the table. His jaw worked, but nothing came out. My mother reached for his arm, and he pulled it away. I looked down at Lily. She was still staring at her plate. Her small hand found my sleeve and gripped it, her knuckles white against the fabric. I stood up slowly. I didn't look at the shock on Connor's face. I didn't look at the mounting horror spreading across my father's. I didn't look at my mother, who had already started whispering something to my father that sounded like damage control. I took Lily's hand. We're leaving, Lily, I said. Blair, wait. My father pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the hardwood. His face had turned a deep, bruised purple. Don't be dramatic. I was just pushing you. You know how I am. That's how fathers talk to their kids. It builds character. I stopped at the doorway. I didn't turn all the way around, just enough for him to see my profile. I do know how you are, Dad, I said. And for the first time, I'm grateful for it. It made this decision very easy. What decision? He said. His voice cracked, not with emotion, with something closer to fear. I didn't answer. I walked Lily to the car. I buckled her seatbelt. I closed her door gently. I walked around to the driver's side and sat down. The engine started with a low, steady hum. I pulled out of the driveway without looking back. In the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller. The porch light flickered. My father stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, watching us go. He didn't wave. He didn't call out. He just stood there, a silhouette in a doorframe, realizing for the first time that the person he'd spent 30 years dismissing was the one holding everything together. Lily was quiet for 4 blocks. Then, in a voice so small it cracked right down the middle, she said, "Mom, am I going to grow up to be a failure?" I pulled the car to the curb. I put it in park. I turned around and looked at my daughter. "No, baby," I said. "You're going to grow up to be exactly who you want to be, and nobody at that table gets to tell you otherwise. Not ever again." She nodded. A single tear slid down her cheek. She wiped it with the back of her hand and looked out the window. I pulled back onto the road. The streetlights cut through the windshield in long, even stripes. Austin was quiet. It was 7:42 p.m. on Christmas night, and something inside me had gone very, very still. Not sad. Not angry. Clear. If you've ever had a family member treat you like you didn't matter while you were the one holding everything together, hit that like button and subscribe. That night, at 11:47 p.m., the house was dark except for the glow of my laptop screen. Lily had fallen asleep on the couch an hour earlier, still in her green velvet dress, one shoe on, one shoe off. I had carried her to bed, pulled the blanket to her chin, and stood in her doorway for a long time, watching her breathe. Her face was peaceful. Whatever my father had put into her head at that table, sleep had softened it, for now. I closed her door gently and walked down the hall to my home office. I sat down at my desk. I didn't turn on the overhead light. I didn't need it. I opened my private banking portal. The screen loaded slowly, the way it always did on the secure server. I entered my credentials. The dashboard appeared. There it was. A pending wire transfer, $450,000, scheduled to close on January 2nd. It was the full purchase price for a 2-bedroom cottage in a retirement community called Hillcrest Meadows, 3 miles from my house. White shutters, a porch swing. A garden bed already planted with gardenias because my mother once mentioned she loved the smell. I had found the property in September. I had toured it alone in October. I had placed the funds into a revocable gift trust in November, with James Miller drafting the paperwork. The plan was simple. On New Year's Day, I was going to hand my parents an envelope. Inside would be a deed, a set of keys, and a card that read, "So Lily can always have her grandparents close." I had imagined my mother's face. I had imagined my father sitting on that porch, finally relaxed, finally softened by the knowledge that his daughter had taken care of him. I had imagined Sunday mornings where Lily walked 3 blocks with a plate of cookies and knocked on their door. That was 12 hours ago. That was a different woman. I looked at the pending transfer, $450,000. Every digit sharp and clean on the screen. I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, nothing. My thumb moved slowly, deliberately across the trackpad. I hovered over cancel transfer. I didn't pause. I didn't close my eyes. I didn't take a breath to steady myself. I clicked. The soft, unmistakable click of confirmation echoed in the dead silence of the room. The transfer status changed from pending to canceled. $450,000 returned to my operating account in the time it takes to blink. I sat there for a moment. The screen glowed. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator down the hall and the tick of the clock above the door. I listened to the silence and realized it didn't feel heavy anymore. It was sharp. It was clear. I opened my email. I typed one message. James. Revoke the Ellerton Family Gift Trust effective immediately. Close the escrow on the Highland property. Return all funds to the primary operating account by 8 a.m. Cancel the monthly recurring transfer to account, ending 4417. Also begin a search for corporate office space in Seattle. We are relocating after the first of the year. Merry Christmas. I read it twice. I hit send. Then I opened my contacts. I scrolled to Dad. I tapped the 3 dots in the corner. I selected block. I did the same for Mom, then Connor, then Aunt Irene. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because I knew they would use her phone within the week. I closed the laptop. The room went dark. I sat there for a long time, listening to the quiet of a house that finally felt like it belonged to me. The cut was clean. 3 weeks passed. January came cold and dry, the kind of Austin winter that feels more like an afterthought than a season. I was in my office downtown, reviewing the onboarding documents for 2 new enterprise clients James had signed during the holiday break, when my assistant, Laura Smith, knocked on the glass. "Your father has called the front desk 11 times this morning," she said. Her voice was careful, neutral. "He's also sent 4 emails to the general inbox. Do you want me to forward them?" "No," I said. "Delete them." She nodded and left. I didn't need to read the emails to know what had happened. The timeline was simple. The escrow company had notified the sellers at Hillcrest Meadows that the buyer had withdrawn. The sellers had notified the listing agent. The listing agent had notified the retirement community's office. And somewhere in that chain, my parents had received a letter informing them that the property they had been told, by me, on Thanksgiving, quietly, privately, was being handled, would not in fact be handled. What they didn't know yet was worse. When I had set up the cottage purchase, my parents had signed a no-contingency agreement with the seller. They had put down a $20,000 earnest money deposit to hold the property while my trust funds cleared. That deposit had not come from them. It had come from my Aunt Irene, who had loaned it to them after my mother told her I would obviously cover it once the deal went through. I hadn't agreed to that. I hadn't been told about it, and I wasn't covering it. The $20,000 was gone, non-refundable, and my parents owed Aunt Irene every penny of it. By the end of January, the voicemail started arriving through channels I hadn't blocked. My father called my office line directly. The transcripts told the story clearly enough. January 4th, 8:12 a.m. "Blair, the bank says the house funds are gone. There must be a mistake. Call me back." January 4th, 11:30 a.m. "Blair, I spoke to the escrow company. They say you canceled. I don't understand. Call me." January 5th, 6:47 p.m. "Blair, your mother is in tears. Irene is asking about the deposit. This isn't funny. Pick up your phone." January 9th, 9:15 a.m. "Blair, Connor says you blocked him. You blocked all of us. What is happening? This is your father. I am asking you to call me back right now." I didn't call back. I didn't respond. I deleted each transcript after reading it, the same way you'd clear old notifications from an app you no longer use. On January 14th at 7:48 p.m., my doorbell rang. I was in the kitchen, cutting strawberries for Lily's lunch the next day. Lily was in her room, reading. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked to the front door. Through the glass panel, I could see my father. He was standing on the porch in a wrinkled coat, his collar crooked, his face drawn and gray in the porch light. Behind him, my mother sat in the passenger seat of a car I didn't recognize. Her head was down. She wasn't looking at the house. I opened the door. I kept my hand on the frame. I didn't step aside. "Blair," my father said. His voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. "We need to talk." "No," I said. "Blair, please. The cottage, the money. Irene is threatening to take us to small claims. Your mother can't sleep. I don't understand what happened." I stayed quiet, letting him continue. "Was it because of what I said at dinner?" "I was joking. You know I was joking. I push you because I believe in you. That's what fathers do." "You called me a failure in front of my daughter," I said. My voice was even, measured. "You told an 8-year-old girl not to grow up to be like her mother. The mother who paid for every dish on that table, the mother who paid off your house, the mother who covered Mom's surgery, the mother who funded Connor's semester he didn't finish." $142,500, Dad? That's what I've given this family in 5 years, and you looked at your granddaughter and told her I was worthless. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. His eyes moved across my face like he was searching for the version of me that would fold, that would step aside, that would say, "Come in, Dad. Let's figure this out." That version was gone. "The cottage was going to be your retirement gift," I said. $450,000, 3 miles from here, a garden, a porch, Sunday mornings with Lily. I paused. "But you'll never see it, because you showed me exactly who I am to you at that table, and for the first time I believed you. Blair, I'm not a failure, Dad. I'm just finished. He stood there. The porch light hummed. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and went silent. My father's hands hung at his sides. He looked old in a way I hadn't noticed before. Not wise old, just tired, hollowed out, like a man standing in front of a door he had locked from the inside years ago, only to realize the key had been on my side the whole time. Please, he said. The word came out cracked. Thin. She's your mother. She laughed, Dad. She sat there and laughed while you humiliated me in front of my child. That's not my mother, that's your audience. His jaw tightened. His eyes went wet. He opened his mouth once more, and I saw the shift happen in real time. The fear turned to anger. The softness hardened back into the man who had sat at the head of that table every year of my life and decided who mattered and who didn't. Fine, he said. His voice went flat. You want to throw your family away over one comment? Over a joke? Then you were never really part of this family anyway. I looked at him for a long time. I felt the weight of that sentence settle into the air between us. And for the first time in 30 years, it didn't hurt. It just confirmed what I had always known. Goodbye, Dad, I said. The door closed softly. No slam. Just the quiet click of the lock sliding into place. I stood in the hallway. The house was still. Through the kitchen window, I could see the taillights pulling away from the curb, fading down the street until they were just two small red dots disappearing into the dark. I walked back to the kitchen. I picked up the knife. I finished cutting the strawberries. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was mine. The weeks following that night on the porch moved quickly. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the next phone call, the next demand, the next performance of family loyalty that required me to shrink so someone else could stand taller. I was just working, building, breathing. James Miller had the Seattle office search narrowed to 3 properties by the second week of January. By February 1st, we had signed a lease on a 12th floor suite in a glass building overlooking Elliott Bay. The movers came on Valentine's Day. Lily thought that was funny. She helped me tape the last box shut in her bedroom, wrote Lily's stuff, fragile, across the top in purple marker, and asked if Seattle had good pizza. I told her we'd find out together. I enrolled her at a school 6 blocks from the new office. She started on a Monday. By Friday, she had been invited to 2 birthday parties and had joined the school's junior soccer team. She came home that afternoon with grass stains on her knees and a grin so wide it made my chest ache in the best way. I didn't hear from my father. I didn't hear from my mother. I didn't hear from Connor. The numbers were still blocked. The emails were still being auto-deleted by a filter James had set up on the company server. The silence on their end wasn't a choice. It was a wall I had built, and I had no intention of taking it down. But silence doesn't mean nothing was happening. I learned what happened next, the way you learn about weather in a city you used to live in. Through peripheral channels, through an old colleague in Austin who mentioned it over a call, through Laura Smith, who still had contacts at the downtown co-working space, through James, who handled the final legal correspondence with the escrow company and forwarded me a 1-page summary I read once and filed. The first thing to go was the deposit, $20,000, non-refundable. My Aunt Irene, who had loaned it to my parents on the promise that I would reimburse her, waited exactly 30 days before filing in small claims court. She won. My parents didn't contest it. They didn't have the money to contest it, and they didn't have the money to pay her back. Irene and my mother hadn't spoken since. The second thing to go was the truck, my father's 2019 Ford F-250. Dark blue, chrome running boards. He had bought it 3 years ago with money he thought came from a dealership loyalty rebate. It hadn't. It had come from me, routed through the same holding company that handled the mortgage payoff. Without the $2,500 monthly transfer I had been sending to their account for the past 3 years, the payments became impossible. He sold the truck in March for $11,000 less than he owed on it. He started driving my mother's 12-year-old sedan, the one with the cracked windshield and the passenger mirror held on with electrical tape. The third thing to go was Connor's stability. Whatever fragile scaffolding had been holding his life together collapsed without the safety net he never knew existed. In April, he was let go from the insurance office. Not laid off. Fired. His uncle, Dennis Ellerton, had apparently been carrying him for months. absorbing his missed deadlines and botched client files out of loyalty to my father. But loyalty has a shelf life, and Connor had burned through his. The termination letter cited chronic underperformance and failure to meet minimum professional standards. Connor moved back into his childhood bedroom. He was 26 years old, sleeping under a poster of a car he would never own, in a house that was no longer paid for by the sister he had never once thanked. By June, the lifestyle my parents had built on invisible money began to crack in ways that couldn't be hidden. The lawn service was canceled. The cable was downgraded. The weekly dinners at Carrabba's stopped. My mother started working 3 days a week at a boutique called Second Story on South Lamar, folding blouses and ringing up candles for $9.50 an hour. My father, who had retired at 59 with the confidence of a man who believed his pension and his daughter's generosity would carry him to the grave, started picking up part-time work as a greeter at a home improvement store off Research Boulevard. He stood at the front door for 6-hour shifts, handing out flyers and saying, "Welcome in to strangers," wearing a name tag that said, George. The man who had called me a parasite was handing out coupons for a living. I didn't feel triumph when I learned that. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt the same thing I had felt the night I canceled that transfer. Nothing. Not cold, nothing. Just the flat, clean absence of something that used to weigh 300 pounds and now weighed 0. By September, the house itself was in trouble. Without my anonymous mortgage payments, which had been covering the gap between my father's pension and the actual monthly note for years, they fell behind. 2 months. Then 3. A letter from the bank arrived in October, the kind of letter that uses words like default and foreclosure proceedings, and 30 days to cure. They refinanced at a brutal rate, stretching the loan another 15 years. My father would be 77 when it was paid off. If it was paid off? The friends noticed. That was the part I hadn't anticipated, though I should have. Austin's social circles aren't large, and the Rotary Club crowd my father had spent decades cultivating was exactly the kind of community where whispers travel fast. Richard Henley hadn't said a word publicly, but he didn't need to. The story told itself. George Ellerton had berated his own daughter at Christmas dinner. That daughter turned out to be worth $28 million. And now the Ellertons were selling furniture on Facebook Marketplace and driving a car with a cracked windshield. People talked. They always do. My father stopped attending Rotary meetings in August. My mother stopped going to her book club in October. Connor didn't have any social circles to withdraw from. He just stayed in his room. 1 year later, I was standing in the kitchen of our new home in Seattle. It was a 3-bedroom craftsman with a fenced backyard and a view of the water through the trees. Lily's room was painted sage green because she had picked the color herself at the hardware store, holding up 6 different swatches before settling on the one she said looked like the inside of a leaf. Her soccer cleats were drying on the back porch. Her report card was on the refrigerator, straight A's, a note from her teacher that read, "Lily is one of the most confident and kind students I've ever had." I poured a cup of coffee and stood at the window. The morning was gray and cool, the way Seattle mornings are, and the water in the distance caught the light in thin silver lines. The house was quiet. Not the heavy quiet of a home where someone is waiting for the next blow. The quiet of a place where no one needs permission to exist. Lily came downstairs in her soccer jersey, her hair in a ponytail she had done herself. She grabbed an apple from the counter and sat on the stool beside me. "Mom," she said, biting into the apple, "remember that Christmas at Grandpa's house?" I looked at her. My chest tightened. "I do." She chewed for a moment, thinking. Then she said, "I'm glad we left." I set my coffee down. "Yeah?" "Yeah." She nodded, her eyes steady and clear in a way that made her look older than 8, almost 9 now. "No one made me sad since then. It's just us, and we're happy." I reached over and smoothed a strand of hair behind her ear. She leaned into my hand for just a second. Then she hopped off the stool, grabbed her cleats from the porch, and ran out the back door toward the car. I stood there for a long time. The coffee went cold in my hands. I didn't mind. Some doors close so better ones can open. Ellerton Systems hit 62 enterprise clients by the end of that year. James Miller negotiated a secondary funding round that valued the company at $41 million. I hired 32 new employees. all of whom got equity packages and a personal welcome email from me on their first day. I didn't give interviews about my family. I didn't post about the holidays. I didn't send a forwarding address. I never regretted a single second of it. The silence was the most expensive thing they ever bought. If you enjoyed this story about protecting your children and knowing your worth, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.